And welcome back to Frankly Speaking. I'm your host, Frank. I'm joined here with my good friend, Julien DeMarco. How are you, buddy?
I'm doing well. How about you?
Oh, fantastic. Thanks for joining me. Hey, listen, lots of news going on right now all over the place. But one of the things that's going on is a lot of this, I guess, woke culture. The conservatives are trying to fight back against it. And Matt Walsh of the Daily Wire has come out and done a new movie, asking the idea or the questions, what a woman is dealing with woke culture. And he had a whole podcast today, and I'll link it up in the description box. And we could talk about that some other time. But within the realm of this this podcast that he did, I think it was yesterday, actually, he talked about the issue of pornography, which is something we've talked about a lot, and how as Americans, how we're to deal with the pornography crisis throughout our civilization, which, again, as I've argued before, Julian, it hurts hearts and minds and souls. And now that any 8-year-old can get their hands on hardcore pornography at a touch of a finger, there's been some debates on the political right to try and understand how we handle this, right? This sort of idea that something is terribly harmful, but at the same time, this sort of, what I consider conservatives always kind of tripping over their own shoelaces with their, kind of idea of limited government and not being able to step in to ban something because it would somehow contradict sort of the founding principles of freedom and liberty. And porn has been one of these sticking points for the political right. And it's interesting because in this cast, Matt Walsh of the Daily Wire sounds like he's coming out in favor of banning pornography. He says, granted, it's going to be hard to do, but I would like to start with small increments. I think it's kind of strange in the sense that I think Ben Shapiro, who's the boss at the Daily Wire, has come out and said, no, we can't ban porn, right? Guys like Shapiro and Glenn Beck have taken more of a libertarian kind of perspective on this, saying that, well, yeah, porn is bad. It does damage. It hurts our boys. It hurts our girls. But in the name of freedom and liberty, we have to allow porn to exist. Because, Julian, if we ban all the bad freedoms when we're in power, when the left gets in power, they're going to ban all of our good freedoms. Thus, we have to allow porn to exist. But in this cast, Matt Walsh made a clear case for pornography has to be banned. And so now you got this internal struggle within the Daily Wire, it looks like. And I think I find it fascinating because the right's trying to figure out again that it's a lot of its philosophical principles are broken and contradictory, Julian.
Yeah, I agree. Does seem like an internal conflict. I don't know how much control Ben Shapiro has on, Matt Walsh or Michael Knowles or Andrew Klavan on their all respective shows and what they talk about. They all have, their what's the word here?
Their liberties.
Yeah, like they have they're able to talk whatever they want on their shows, or their political views. They don't have it's not like the woke left or the liberal where you all have to be in lockstep. So I mean,
they allow for some dissension, some disagreement.
Yes, dissension, disagreement. I mean, if you ever watch their Daily Wire backstage shows, they do have they do disagree with things and stuff like that. Michael Knowles has been asked, has he ever tried to baptize or Ben Shapiro or, talk about religion and stuff like that. And, he was asked about, the Bishop Barron episode and stuff like that. And Michael Knowles has come out and said, repeatedly, if Ben and I are on an airplane and it's crashing, I'm going to grab this cup and I'm going to baptize him, whether he wants it or not. So it's not as if everybody on the Daily Wire is all lockstep. So Ben Shapiro is for limiting obviously porn, and he thinks porn is bad. He has a whole book about the pornification of the country. And Matt Walsh, now it appears, is for an outright ban. Now, mind you, St. Thomas Aquinas said that banning porn and brothels is St. Thomas Aquinas was for banning porn in the sense that it shouldn't be available, but he was not for, outlawing whorehouses or brothels. And I've talked about this before in the past in other podcasts when we talked about this subject.
Right.
It's more about the fact that you have to go out to go to the whorehouse. And so you have to physically leave and you have to go there and everybody can see you. So
there's an exerted effort that has to take place. Yes.
Yeah. You're doing something in public. And so that's different as opposed to something that you're presumably doing in private. That it's more of trying to, it's sort of like, if you're going to do something bad, do it in public. Don't do it in private, if that makes sense.
Sure. I gotcha. Okay. Well, yeah, because I think Shapiro, he wrote that book, I think about a decade ago, roughly. I remember seeing it in bookstores way back when. And I think he gets caught up in a lot of the libertarian-esque arguments that we can't ban pornography because in essence, it's not the job of the federal government or the centralized government to come in and sort of, stop this, thing, even as bad as it is, because then it would give government way too much power in all areas of our lives. We need to strip this down locally as much as we can. And of course,
you can't legislate morality. I mean, even the last time a state tried to legislate morality was the Roman Empire under Augustus.
Sure.
Of the Julius Caesar, Cleopatra, Mark Antony fame. The first Caesar of Rome. He legislated everything from obviously laws to the morality of Rome. And so that's something I don't think a lot of the West is based off of Rome, whether it's pagan Rome or Christian Rome and its laws. But legislating morality is not something that is necessarily part of Western tradition. That is mostly a Protestant thing. For example, in Catholic countries, when it comes to sodomy,
right,
there obviously sodomy is wrong, but there wasn't legislation to obviously you couldn't get married or any of these, you couldn't marry another man or any of these things, but it wasn't criminalized.
Right.
And it was Protestant countries that criminalized sodomy.
Right.
Protestant countries legislated morality. Catholic countries did not. Orthodox countries did not legislate. If something had to deal with morality, that was left for the church. It wasn't the state that legislated necessarily your moral conduct. Is any of this making sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. And again, it leads to the problem, which is America and the pluralistic nation that has become. But I think it's also coupled with the fact that we have technology that no other generation in the history of human race has ever had to deal with. And so I think it's a good time to reassess and start asking questions. Where do we go from here when an 8-year-old, within the matter of pushing 2 buttons on his phone, can see hardcore pornography? And I think we're starting to see some of the evidence of what pornography does to hearts and minds. I believe it was Ted Bundy, the mass murderer, came out and said, listen, all these guys on death row all had a porn addiction. Same with who is that Jesse Romero, who's a Catholic now, used to work at down at the LA prisons. He would tell you all those inmates had porn addictions. And so we've seen just in one small example there, the adverse effect it's had, especially in a society, Julian, where we don't have a church in place to dictate this. See, that's the big problem here. And I go back to, again, what I keep talking about, the founding of the nation, where the founding fathers left morality wide open for every individual to interpret for himself. So if you have no overarching principle, you have no overarching culture, you have no monarch or leader like a father that can advise you, how do we manage this when young hearts and minds and souls are being corrupted, and now it's playing out at a greater cultural level? Yeah.
Yeah, I think what one of the solutions that Matt Walsh said, for example, that 8-year-old, is, actual age verification for stuff like that, and not just when are you 18 years old, yes or no, and then if you press yes, you go in.
Sure.
It doesn't actually verify if you're 18 or older, but actual verification where you have to actually give an ID. Like it takes you have to give a picture of your ID that proves that you are actually 18 in order to go forward.
And I guess that's
as he said in his podcast, what the issue is that people don't want, by doing something like that, it is limiting their access, essentially.
Sure.
Is they don't want any type of limitations on their access.
And I guess that's the question. Listen, I think pornography is bad for everybody, not just kids, but it's bad for adults just as much as anything else. And it's been a byproduct of the sexual revolution, right? I mean, it all started to collapse once the pill was made over the counter in 1961. Before you know it, you had divorce skyrocketing, the porn was being legalized. Alternative lifestyles now are becoming much more rampant in society. And I guess that's the question. Listen, when I was a kid or a young man, before the internet, we walked into a liquor store or whatever it is to get the Playboy, whatever it is you're getting, you needed to show an ID. Grads at 18 years of age or 21, whatever the age was, I believe it was 18 at the time. I still think it's damaging for young men, but at the very least, there was somebody, a buffer there for at least the youngest minds at that developmental age. Do we ban porn altogether? That's a discussion we can have. But at the very least, I agree with Matt Walsh. There's got to be some kind of a buffer, at least, where we're not going on the internet and the youngest kids, the youngest of minds and hearts that are going to be the future of the country, are getting access to hardcore porn. And I still don't think, Julian, we know the consequences yet, because this millennial generation is the first generation raised completely on porn, unfeathered. Don't get me wrong, I'm Gen X, right? We got a hold of porn back in the days, but we had to go through the loopholes to get it. Now it's just right there at every kid's fingertips, and don't tell me there's not going to be social ramifications, Julian.
I definitely think there are social ramifications. It seems like there are all these studies and trends and cultural things that are going on. Men are having less sex. They're having less relationships. They're getting married. Now this is a combination of things. With feminism, pornography, wokeness, the the deterioration between male and female relationships. All of this is making a perfect storm.
Yes,
and
it is.
And pornography does have something to play in that, in the fact that people are they're not wanting to actively go out and pursue relationships, whether they be sexual or romantic, with another with an actual real life person. Because why put in the effort when you have this thing at your fingertips? She's always ready. And
Yep.
it's an addiction. It's psychological. It's about dopamine. The thing is, though, the more porn that you consume, the more you have the dopamine hit, and it does something to your brain. Now, science shows that it takes about, I believe, a week or 2 weeks at most for your brain to detox from porn. So the longer you stop looking at porn, the more you'll be able to reset your brain. But when you're on, that's why if you're watching porn, that's why you'll find yourself going more hardcore, and you'll consume more of it, and then you'll find yourself watching things that you would have never thought that you would have watched because of that dopamine chemical reaction. So if you're just watching something plain vanilla, two people going at it, and then the next thing you know, you wherever you're watching it, and then you're like, oh, this is boring. I need some. It's not doing it for me. Oh, well, why don't we have like 2 girls and 1 guy, or 2 girls and,
Sure.
Because you have consumed so much, the dopamine that you got from what you were watching, you've elevated your dopamine is now at your dopamine is at an unnatural level.
Right.
And you're
right.
not getting, when you've plateaued. The guy and the girl going at it isn't doing anything for you because it's not creating enough dopamine. So you'll find yourself watching something else like, ooh, this is because it's new and exciting. And so what that does is create even more dopamine. And so what it is it's all this exciting things. And so it's all these chemical reactions. This is not, well, this is talked about, but this is not necessarily talked about in the public sphere, essentially, when it comes to porn addiction and why it is so addictive.
Yeah, and I think that's the problem we have, and then it kind of expands out into things like marriages and things like that, and which becomes problematic. I think it's, oftentimes we also believe that because the vast majority is being consumed by men, that it's a problem primarily for men, but it's a problem for women too.
Actually, you'll be very surprised, but a lot of the studies, the studies for women looking at porn are just as high as men.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's interesting. I listen, I knew years ago there was a problem with pornography, in the sense that pornography, I think, paved the way for the acceptance of a lot of the alternative lifestyles. I know when, straight men started accepting lesbian porn as an acceptable fetish. Here you have straight men that are purposely finding unnatural sex as a fetish of sorts. I said, this is going to be a problem years down the line. And this is back in my days when I was younger, I was noticing this, and here we are. And I believe that pornography has led to all kinds of social consequences. And so the question is, in a pluralistic nation like America, what do we do? I mean, Julian, you say it's the Protestants that ban porn, Catholics allow it. Now, I think, in a predominantly Catholic nation with the church
I didn't say that Protestants ban porn and Catholics allow it. I say that Protestants legislate morality and Catholics are a little bit laissez-faire when it comes to legislating morality.
Okay, fair enough. How would a Catholic nation handle it different than a Protestant nation?
Well, like it did do. Again, with the brothels, like obviously brothels existed, but pornographers were put in jail. But for example, like in France, before the revolution, it was illegal to make pornography, but it wasn't illegal to possess it. If that makes sense.
Okay, so they did attack it. They attacked the source, right? Is what they did.
Yes.
Okay, so what's the difference? I guess I'm asking the question, what is effectively the difference? Is it just tactics here? In effect, isn't that still...
It's more of a cultural thing. It's all encompassing. It's not just pornography. There is more of a...
Well, I would say this. I think there's more of a sense of shame and blame in those Catholic nations, unlike in a more secularized Protestant nation where everybody kind of gets to believe what they want and we do away with shame and blame, right?
Well, that's more of a new thing with Protestant secular nations. That wasn't the case in back in the old days. Remember, the Scarlet Letter is a puritanical Protestant thing.
Yes. Well, explain to our audience what that is.
The Scarlet Letter?
Yes.
Well, from what I understand, the Scarlet Letter is a woman who is, if I'm not mistaken, it's a single woman who is unmarried who had relations with another man who was not her husband. And she would basically wear a red letter on her person, and that would let everyone know that she did something she wasn't supposed to do.
Right. Okay, so let's talk about solutions here. We clearly have something that's having detrimental effects on really all Americans at this point, starting with our youth. What is the proper action in your mind? I mean, listen, Shapiro's going to argue for local governments to ban it, right? Walsh sounds like he's going for more of a complete ban. I don't know if he means at a state or federal level. And then you got the Glenn Becks of the world that will tell you.
Well, I really honestly, I think it has a lot to do with the parents. I mean, you can talk about legislation and, when you go to the site, are you 18 or older? Please provide identification. Yeah. It's secured. We won't give it out. Once we verify, you can do all that. You can talk, but at the end of the day, it really is the parents. Now,
let me tell you something. Julian. I'm a parent, and this stuff is difficult to keep out of the houses as much as I've tried. You need expensive programs, and even that, there's workarounds. They know how to filter through. Kids know how to work around. There's problems there. And then my question is, a society where the family's completely broken down, there's not a lot of parents, first of all, in the home. Second of all, in a usury system where both parents are constantly working now. I mean, parenthood has completely broken down in the past 50, 60 years.
Oh, and so of course.
I'm not sure parents alone can do it. because it's a community problem now.
Well, I mean, that's where the whole concept, it takes a village. But the thing is, though, the village isn't there anymore. I mean, so it's an all, it's not just this is the right solution. We're dealing with a multifaceted 360 problem. A lot of problems have to be fixed here. Okay, first off, parents need to be involved. That's in the top 5 things. Along with banning porn. Porn, in the top 5 things to fix the porn problem, banning porn is number 5, in my opinion. Number 1 is parents, because I honestly don't think parents are as involved. I know for a fact, from my own personal experience.
Well, wait a minute, Julie, hold on. Let me tell you about my personal experience, because I've had these conversations with parents. Okay, I have kids. I've used programs here. We've had lots of talks about pornography in our home and things like that. But when I've talked to other parents about pornography, their kids have cell phones. Most of them don't have blocks on them. And most parents are disengaged, in a sense that they don't want to deal with it. Because 1, it costs more money out of pocket to put these blocks on these devices. Number 2, many parents are living with their own kind of history and sins, growing up in a pornographied sort of world as well, too. And the parents that I talk to, this is the response that I've gotten, is that, listen, I'm not going to block you from my kid. Kids are going to make mistakes. We've all made mistakes. Look at me. I watched porn when I was younger. I was exposed to it. I'm fine. My kid's going to be fine too, Julian.
That does tend to be the response. Now, I'm not saying that it's right, but there is some truth to it, in the sense that we all make mistakes, and kids are going to make mistakes. Adults make mistakes too, but it is the fact that parents are disengaged. Now, at least I don't know if these parents are Catholic or what their religious affiliation are, but most of the people that I come in contact with, the kids that 16, 18, 19, 20-something-year-olds that I come in contact with, a lot of them come from dysfunctional families, or they're just not dysfunctional in the fact that they're single parents, so which is very normal. So most people don't even think that it's dysfunctional, but it is. And most of them come from unchurched in the true sense of the word. So they're baptized, but they don't do anything. And so the parents are, not, from the conversations that I have with these kids, I mean, they're not, their parents aren't, they're very hands off, in the sense that I honestly don't know if they know what their kids are doing half the time. I mean, some of the kids that I employ at the place that I manage, I don't even think their parents know that they have a job, that their kid has a job.
Yeah.
Like they're so not involved in their child's life. Them worrying about their child watching porn is probably like the last thing on their mind, because their child is, it literally is, it's 10 o'clock. Do you know where your child is at? It's literally like that.
Yeah.
If they were asked that question, I honestly don't think a lot of these parents would know.
Okay. Yeah, fair enough. But the problem is, we do have kids that are being raised in these households, and that's the question. Now, you brought up the whole issue of it takes a village. I think that's more about, a socialist redistribution of the idea of wokeism and leftism to indoctrinate our kids. I think in this case,
obviously that's a
yeah,
the takes a what they're doing is co-opting something that is actually good, that it
okay,
takes a
fair enough.
village.
Yes, you're right.
And they're
because
using it for their own nefarious purposes.
Right, because there are some cases where communities have to come together. I know you have certain organizations within the Catholic Society, like the Cardinal Newman Society and things like that. I know they're not perfect, but they're calling for a ban on pornography. I think people are scrambling in a pluralistic society. How do we handle this situation? Because too many kids are getting access to it now. So whether it's a Catholic tradition historically, I think what changes the dynamic here is the technology at hand, Julian. And we're seeing a completely pornographied society. It's breaking down relationships. It's breaking down marriages. And don't get me wrong, it's not the only thing, but it's a primary cause of the social dysfunction that has become the West at the hands of modern technology. At the end of the day, I guess, and listen, I agree with you that parents have to be involved. And the parents that I've run into that say to me, well, kids are going to make their mistakes, kind of a thing. It baffles me. It baffles me because the first thing I think of as a parent is, why would you want your son or even your daughter to do damage to their minds? I mean, that pornography stuff, once it enters the mind, the heart, and the soul, it never goes away. You take that to your grave with you, but there's parents that are in denial for whatever reason. Either they're too ashamed to talk about it to their kids, they don't want to pay for the extra program to block it, whether it's they have their own sins, their own guilt because they watched pornography and took part in sort of the sexual activities when they were young in that sense. And it's hard for a lot of parents to come out and now start judging and start disciplining, understanding their kids are now doing some of the similar things they were doing when they were kids. I don't know why it is, but parents have failed. The community has failed. Julian, government has failed. Our churches are nowhere to be found anymore at this point in history. Education has been corrupted. The media has been corrupted. Everything has been co-opted now by a far left woke kind of ideology that dominates the world, and we've surrendered the future of the country and the future of the West, Julian, to the pornographers. What do we do?
I think.
How about limited bans? How about regional bans at the very least? Can we at least get it out of the hands of those under 18?
Yeah, of course. I think didn't recently some states and some areas there were some colleges I think last year or the year before last, made headlines that it was banning porn from their campus. Like when you use the campus Wi-Fi, right, you can't connect to porn. And I think was it Starbucks that also made it impossible for you to connect to porn through their Wi-Fi as well. There was a couple of places and counties that I know. Didn't Texas recently, like in the last year or two, do something with porn too? That it's almost like a ban as well.
Yeah, I think the state of Montana has tried to deal with that. I know the state of Utah, where I'm at, has tried to deal with it. I believe, I don't know if it passed or not. I got to look it up. I should look it up before we did this cast. What they try to do in Utah is try to ban porn off all new sales of cell phones, right? So you cannot get access to pornography of any new cell phones you will buy at your cell phone shop, right?
This is Utah, correct?
Yeah, that's in Utah. I don't know if that bill passed or not, but there's things. Listen, who was it? No, one of these government agencies came out and said that pornography is a real health problem right now across the country. And I say, no duh, really? It's obvious, but even the secular culture is starting to figure this out. And when we look at things like, and I don't know if this is related, but all these mass shootings that continue to happen over America with these young boys, I wonder back in my mind how much pornography has played in sort of the discombobulation of that young mind. Like I said, the death row inmates, it's clear there. I just think there's so many social ills that we haven't even begun to crack even the slightest, how do you say it? We're not even close to understanding the level of corruption in hearts and minds that pornography has caused. I think we're going to be dealing this for generations to come. Listen, am I calling for an all-out ban on pornography? I think to a certain extent you have to deal with this somehow. Whether it's either you go after the pornographers or you go after the access of it, something has to be done. I don't want to hear this argument about, what the Glenn Beck's always say is that, well, as long as we all read the Bible, right? What will happen is people will become spiritually awakened. And as a result, a religious society that reads the Bible, there'll be no marketplace for pornography. And I just have to laugh at that because that fails to deal with concupiscence, right? If you put a man in a hotel room and you got a porn magazine in the Bible, which one is he going to pick up? He's going to pick up the porn magazine, I would argue 8 out of 10 times. Concupiscence is real. And then the other problem I have with that, because in America, we've never established true religious principles. We've adopted religious liberty and religious indifferentism. Okay, this whole thing about reading the Bible, I'm not against the Bible. I love the Bible. It's the word of God. But sola scriptura has failed in every Protestant nation that has ever existed. And if you look at the Protestant nations, again, with the sola scriptura, whether it's Norway or Finland or Sweden or America now, or all these Protestant, they lead the way in the new liberal order. I mean, as I keep arguing, Julie, the last vestiges of that fight to save our civilization, particularly to morality, it's come from Catholic nations. There's a big divide between that marginal line of the Protestants and the Catholics between North and South Europe. I mean, at least in Catholic nations, you have some of the population still goes to church. But in Protestant nations, it doesn't happen. And it starts with this idea that, okay, the Bible. Fine, it's the word of God. I get it. But there's more to it. We've never had that true religious foundation of the faith here. I mean, look out east. I'm not one that bashes our Orthodox brothers and sisters over there, right? They've maintained the faith over there. Southern Europe has maintained the faith to a certain degree, despite all the infiltration of democracy. But these Protestant nations, Julian, they continue to tell me, just read the Bible. It's never worked, Julian.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of factors why Protestantism imploded, but it's a heresy. All heresies are weird, and all heresies are interesting in the fact that why do they last so long? Why do they pop up? And why do some last? Why do some fizzle out? Protestantism, along with Islam, is one of those weird heresies that what is the longevity? Why has it lasted so long?
Because
Islam,
you can make it malleable. You can do whatever you want.
It's very obvious if you're not one of those people that say Islam is a religion of peace. It's quite clear why Islam has lasted so long. It really is convert or die. It is very totalitarianism, and it's one of the things of Islam is you don't convert to Islam. You don't convert to being a Muslim. You're returning to Islam. You're returning to Allah. in Islam, everyone is born a Muslim, whether you know it or not. And when you can, air quotes, convert to Islam, you're just returning to Islam. You're just returning back to what you always were. And in Catholicism, that's not, and just in Christianity, whether you want to call it Protestantism or Catholicism or Orthodoxy, that when you convert, you convert. Nobody is born a Christian. You're not returning to Christianity when you convert to Christianity. You're converting to Christianity because you never were Christian before. But it's interesting for Protestantism, there wasn't really some Protestant sects, not all, and those ones fizzled out. But there was some Protestant sects where it really was convert or die. But the vast majority of Protestant sects, especially the main lines, like the Lutherans and the Methodists and the Anglicans, it wasn't really convert or die. But it's interesting. Like I think one of the reasons why they've lasted so long is because they're fundamentally tied to the state of where they're at, and seeing as these states still exist in today, that's why Protestantism has still lasted. But again, also, why hasn't Catholicism done anything to try and convert these nations, reconvert these nations either? And for example, there's lots of I've read some books, particularly for Scandinavia. For Scandinavian, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Finland, when they converted, they were some of the last countries to convert. So to give you some idea, England has like 500 to 600 years of being Christian over the Scandinavian countries. By the time the Scandinavian countries became Christian and gave up paganism, within 400 years, the Protestant Revolution happened. So, and they were the Scandinavian countries, along with huge territories of the Holy Roman Empire, which is Germany today, they became Protestant. So a lot of the countries that didn't become Protestant, England, but outside of them, were countries that had already been Catholic for a very long time. England, that's a whole different story. Protestantism is very foreign to England. It has a lot to do with the aristocracy and the king, but it has more to do with the aristocracy and less to do with the king. I know everybody wants to say it's Henry VIII and da-da. Well, it's much more nuanced than that. It's not, he just wants to have all these divorces and chop off heads and stuff like that. There's much. It's very easy to paint Henry VIII as the villain. It's very easy to do that because he makes himself out to be this villain. But it's a lot. Yep. It's a lot more. It's a lot less black and white and a lot more gray. But when it comes to Scandinavia, they weren't Christian for a very long time. And so again, when the Protestant Revolution comes, they've been Christian for like 400 or 500 years.
Yeah.
And so I think, of course they're going to go on to the new thing.
Right. Well, here's the thing. I think in discussion, I think that you presented to me with E. Michael Jones that talked about the Protestant Reformation. You talk about there's more nuance to what happened in England. He argues there's more nuance to the Protestant Reformation. He believes the theology aspect of the Protestant Reformation was actually a very small part of the Reformation, that it was basically a giant looting operation against the church to take its properties is what it was. But we're not taught that throughout history. So, and I think we saw that in the Scandinavian nations. We saw that in Germany. And I think a lot of the deals were cut with the nobility, I believe, and maybe some of the monarchs. So it's interesting. Listen, Julien, great conversation here. I think we can agree that pornography is a social hazard at this point in history, poisoning the hearts and minds of our young men and women. I know that, the lead up to the French Revolution, there was a massive wave of pornography there. It was a naked lady liberty that ultimately led to the Grand Revolution, overthrow of the monarchy there. Men that were completely disordered, pornography playing a role there in the French Revolution. And now we're seeing a revolution in our own country here. How do we handle that? That's a great debate. I'm one in favor of more restrictions. I'll say that again, because we don't have a church in place. We don't have any moral principles in place. Like I said, I think the greatest weakness of America was the idea of religious liberty, aka religious difference, when the founding fathers said to us, you do you, I do me, and as long as we don't cross each other's property lines, we don't shoot each other. That's not a very good governing body of philosophy when it comes to morality. I think they took for granted that it was a Christian culture at the time. And now that we've gone through an apostasy, I think it's very clear we're at a peril time at this point in history. Contraception, divorce and remarriage, disordered life, and pornography have all played a major role in the collapse of the West. Julian, my friend, thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Thank you for having me.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's my good friend Julien DeMarco of the May He Reign vlog. Check out his site. This is Frank signing off for Frankly Speaking. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.